even if you continue to do a little bit of cost plus for a while because you're transitioning, but at some point, know the value that you deliver. And that will be a transformational exercise in your organization.
Coffee's for closers only.
So we've established my proposal is sound in principle. Now we're just haggling over price.
Let's see how much we're going for on eBay.
Man, it's the same as Dunkin' Donuts. Costs 15 times the price.
Welcome to Impact Pricing, the podcast where we discuss pricing, value, and the intentional relationship between them. I'm Mark Stiving. Today our guest is Stephan Liozu. Here are 3 things you want to know about Stephan before we start. He is the Chief Value Officer at Thales. He's got a PhD in management, but it's more like a PhD in pricing. And he is extremely prolific, having written, 9 books now on pricing, something like that. Welcome, Stephan.
Thank you. Thanks for having me today.
Yeah, it's going to be a great conversation. So how did you get into pricing in the first place?
Well, that's interesting. I fell into pricing. In 1998, I was named SAP deployment leader for Owens Corning in Europe as a second job. And I took care of the pricing module in SAP. And I quickly realized that no one wanted to do it. And then I became enemy number 1 in 6 months with all the sales force. And I'm like, what's going on? What's going on? And I got very intrigued. And then from there, 1998 to today, I'm still intrigued, but I'm doing quite a bit of work in it.
I don't think I've ever met a pricing person who didn't fall into it.
Mm-hmm. It's one of these things, Mark, where it's in your mindset. You're courageous. You go in. You say, hey, I'm gonna do that stuff. I think I can do it. And then you realize that, oh my God, it's much more complicated than I thought. But it's if you have more of a growth mindset and you take challenging projects and you do it, you fall into it rather.
Yeah. Well, and the other thing about it, which I find so fascinating, is it has such a huge impact on a company that after you fall into it and you go solve a problem and you say, wow, that was really impactful. Mm-hmm. Now you want to go do it again and again and again.
Yeah, and then you become an evangelist because you say, guys, look at how much EBITDA or look at ROI that we're delivering. Why aren't we doing more of this? So and this is what I've been doing for 10 years, evangelizing C-suites, and let's do it.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so let's get into this. First off, how in the world did you get a title of Chief Value Officer? What do you do?
Well, this is interesting because, I in my very first book in 2012, I co-wrote with Ron Baker, Ron Baker, a chapter on the emerging role of Chief Value Officer. And he had been publishing quite a bit of stuff on the field. And I was like, wow, we need to promote that title. And at the time, we actually wrote a chapter on the job description, what it means. Pretty much it means being the chief conductor of all the value and pricing activity in an organization. And then you think of multi-dimensional role where you have all the functions, from the go-to-market functions, innovation, marketing, pricing, and sales. So you manage the value component in all of these functions, and then on top of it, you have value creation, value quantification, value extraction, or value capture through pricing. So I'm managing these 2, sequences, I would say, and it's fascinating because you get value is everywhere. So I'm everywhere, from supply chain to and everything that we do is to create value for customers, right? So, but then the customer value management process is a real process.
Yeah. So it's funny. First off, let me stop and ask the question. You said 3 things on the C's. You said create, something, and capture. What was the middle one that you used?
It's customer quantification.
Quantification, customer quantification.
So the assessment, the quantification, what I would call dollarization, okay, you're creating value. How much of that is that in financial terms? Okay.
I often write, preach, teach, create, communicate, capture value. Mm-hmm. is the role of pricing and companies. Now, what you said that I found fascinating, and I think this is awesome, is a company spends 99% of their effort trying to create value, and then 1% is that pricing piece, which says, how do we go capture all that value we just created?
Yeah.
And yet I find it fascinating that most companies have no idea what value even means.
Mm. Yeah, so it's a very complex area because of, there is, first of all, an issue of definition, right? And then, For some people, value is cheap. For other people, is customer value or business value or financial value, shareholder value. So I mean, just everybody uses these terms, and in essence, I'm focusing on customer value, right? And then there is another issue is, in the marketing literature, as you know, and a lot of people write about co-creation or creation of value, and they think that creation includes the entire spectrum of what value is. And I actually wrote an academic paper on that, saying that creation is creation. You still need to go capture it. So and we're doing a disservice to the area by just calling it creation. If you don't intentionally measure it and then go capture it with strategic intention, then you create all you want. If you have willing customers, well, they'll say, yeah, I have value, but customers say, hey, I'll take whatever you create, and that's it. So you really have to have the three components that I mentioned before.
Yeah, absolutely. So how do you do this inside Thales, or how do you do this as you teach people how to go measure value, create value, and capture value?
Well, obviously, on the upfront, I would say in innovation and marketing and R&D and the technology, everything that we do has to bring value, which means I help them with the business model design, the value prop design. I go into the lean canvas with the pains and the customer problems. And, you got to pay a lot of attention there, on what you're creating, why you're creating all these innovation and the marketing programs. And that to be better than competition, to create a competitive advantage, to delight the customer, and then to give them either a savings or incremental revenues, right? So a lot of work there, as you can imagine, dealing with a lot of engineers and R&D and technology team. And we get into AI and cyber and physical products and complex systems. But then it's not done, because then on the marketing and pricing side, I have to measure that. And the way we do this is through the dollarization methodology, the EVE, or value exchange. There's different names for it. And we have, a software, value-based pricing software we use to do EVEs. And we do hackathons, which is, imagine 20 teams, 120 people in a room, dollarizing, what we've created, and see, how much of that value is it in dollars and cents or euros and cents. And then eventually it's got to be moved on to value selling, and equipping, these the sellers and the BD guys with value props that are quantified, so that we can negotiate for value, right?
Yeah, and so the second two steps, I think, are you and I might do them a little bit differently, but I think in general, in concept, they're just spot on, right? It's what you have to go do. The first step, as you were describing the value creation, it almost sounded like you were saying, I've got a blank slate. I'm going to go in and talk about business canvases and how to create a business model. And I find that so rare that you get to go change that much inside a company.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's slowly but surely. I've done this for 4 years, and we're using. I love the methodologies that are out there. Whether it's a lean canvas or a business model canvas or value prop canvas, people like to rally around these. And it's really showing an entire picture of the what you need to do externally to be attractive, what you need to do internally to make sure you deliver, right? And obviously, and then the margin that you're creating. So cost and revenue model. So and I designed my proper canvas on the pricing model innovation canvas to help teams work on innovation and pricing. How do you move from a product pricing to a subscription pricing? How do you measure the value and all that stuff? So the canvas are good frameworks for people to converge and to work in. It's a good summary, high-level vision of this. And then you got to make sure that, obviously there's meat in the canvas, when we're talking about customer problems. So I tell my team, for example, our competitors are also looking at the customer problem. So we got to do a better job at understanding the customer problem, uncovering it through market research, insights, ethnographic research. So it's not like, I do one and it's done. You got to get out of the building and talk to your customers, right?
Yeah, we have to go listen to our customers. So address the following, because almost every company I talk to, if I were to ask them the question, how much does your customer value your product? Mm-hmm. They have no idea what the answer is. They don't even know how to think about the answer. Why is it that in most businesses, we think 99% of their business is there to create value, and yet they don't even know what that means?
Well, I think because the management of customer value is a process, and you got to deploy it fully. And this is why I back to your question about the title, I wanted not to be a CPO chief pricing officer. I wanted to be a CVO, a chief value officer, because our, I would say our critical problems are around value. Pricing comes later. So you really have to, apply the methodology all the way. So a lot of companies stop in the middle, or they're creating these value props that are maybe somewhat dollarized with percentages, like 3% improvement, 5% yield reduction, whatever it is. But they don't, what does it mean in dollars and cents, So especially in front of the economic buyer. So in B2B and B2G, you want to have numbers. Now, some of these things are just plain experiential benefits, right? And then at the end, assuming we convince the economic buyer and the buying center to buy from us, we never go the extra mile of actually verifying and documenting the realized value. So this is extremely rare, and I will tell you it's extremely difficult to do. How do you go and actually make sure you deliver the value you promised, right? Because the next time around you have a bid, you want to make sure you put that in the face of, the buying center saying, we delivered you $1 million and here's a proof and you agreed on it. Work with me on the next bid.
Right. Do we actually have the metrics up front? Define those metrics to go figure out what is it that we expect to deliver, and did we actually deliver that? And not from a product perspective, from a results perspective.
Correct. The outcome and the impact.
Yeah.
So in my previous writing, former writing, there's things you can do, and recently that I've come across the technology, that you can be used to actually quantify the realized value in agreement with the customer, and that's essential. The customer has to agree with you that the value was realized, because then there's no discussion. Once you go back in negotiation, then we agree on that. Up to like I would say probably 2 years ago, you would do the value audit, you would do dashboards, you would do some basic surveys, and then you would reconstruct, even if the customer doesn't agree with you, your own, through the customer value file, your own, impact, and then you would send that to the customer. The issue with that is you don't get them to agree and acknowledge that the value was delivered.
Yeah. So you mentioned Ron Baker's name. As I listened to his podcast on a regular basis, they started talking about something called value conversations. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if you've heard their perspective on that or as they talk about it, but it's pretty interesting. They do it mostly for professional service type firms. Yep. Where every deal is different. And what they're expecting is a salesperson to go out and figure out what are the big problems we're going to solve and what's the value if we actually solve those problems for that customer. And I find that fascinating. And I thought if we take that exact same concept, move it back into the product world, we could have product managers doing value conversations before we ever build products to know, is there real value in having this capability in our product?
Yeah, and I agree with that term, because a lot of the time, especially in B2B industrial, we create these cut and dry value prop, but they are not very, pretty and not poetic, I would say. So we don't kind of help you enter in conversation with the customer. And this is where typically the sales guy, the CAMs and the SAMs would go in and have more conversations. And you have great sales enablement tools now, value selling tools that will help you transform your cut and dry, technology focused value props into conversations. And it kind of psychologically, it puts your customers at ease, when you have conversation, and whether it's in creation mode, in quantification, validation, and in communication, and it's softer. You can still get the same outcome when you get the nuggets that you want, the validation points, but you can't go like an engineer showing all kinds of different charts and about my value props and all that stuff. And especially, when you have customers that don't speak your language, right? Yeah. Some of the buying centers, we don't speak your technology.
Yeah, I like to think of that whole value conversation as our customer doesn't know our product that well, so there's no way they know how much value they're going to get from our product. Mm-hmm. And we don't know our customer that well, so there's no way we know how much value that customer is going to get from our product. Yeah. And so it really takes a conversation between us and our customer to quantify what that value is, both before the sale and then, as you point out, even after the implementation, are we delivering on that value?
That's correct. And one of the critical barriers that we see is internally, a lot of the time, our product managers and our sales guys are not fully trained on the products and the customer benefits of the product. So we go in and kind of, wing it or have these plain vanilla discussions. And so it makes it very complicated when you don't know your own, programs very well. And now put yourself in digital transformation mindset now, where digital is so fuzzy and all that stuff is very theoretical. It's even worse because we don't know the value and we don't know fully the solution that we're going to offer to our customers when we go out there. So it reinforces the need that you have to go in and forge real conversation with them, and they have to trust you, in what you're saying, and they have to believe that you're in there for their interest. Now, obviously, you have to be in the front of the right customer, right? The value buyers, the partnership seekers, and not price buyers, because then it may be a tough experience.
Yeah. So let me go back to the question. I don't know if I asked it exactly this way, but let me ask it. Why don't companies understand value? Right? Why is this such a rare thing that you and I get, and all of our colleagues get, but most companies, it's like pounding them on the head with a hammer to say you got to go figure out what your value is. Yeah,
that's interesting. So there's multiple reasons for this, and the first time that comes to mind is they're very product oriented. A lot of companies have been around for, especially in the industrial world, right? Even in the software world, you could say they're pushing their functionalities, they're pushing their technology, and it's not very good as far as getting into conversations and opening up the value discussion. So that's one thing. The second one, in manufacturing, I would say we're very cost oriented, right? As you know, cost of competition. So we do forget a little bit about that side of value and being customer centric and the intimacy with the customer. So that's for sure. And the third thing is, again, back to the misunderstanding of what we mean by value. Right? Everybody thinks they know the value of everything, right? But at the end of the day, again, we're talking financial value or something else. So there is definitely a lack of training and education around value, even in the pricing community. Mark, frankly, we're much more pricing oriented than value oriented.
I think I'm seeing that shift a little bit. Absolutely. Where more and more pricing people are saying, let's go do value discovery conversations or finding a way to say, what's the value? But I think you're right that we spend way too much time on pricing, especially when you get to the technology side, right? If we're going to use AI or data driven, that's all pricing and very little value driven.
Yeah, but because exactly for what you said before, to be doing the work in value, you have to have value conversations. And you have to be trained to have conversations. And, I look at my teams, who is good and skilled to have value conversation. Like you look at the methods for doing interviews and getting under the skin of the customer and ask them to give you the information you want to hear without directly asking them. But who's training the people to ask the right questions and engage in conversations, right? And I tell you, it's very it's a skills that we don't train enough.
Yes. And so our salespeople need to know those skills, but I think our product managers and our product marketers really need those skills as well. Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Yep. And this is why I always recommend, Mark, to include your communications guy in your value activities. They're pretty good at drafting stories and asking questions and focusing on the user. So I like to work with the communication folks and then remove the cut and dry aspect in the conversation and focus on the soft stuff.
Yeah. Let me toss out one more reason why companies may not think about value. What do you think of the fact that they don't want to do market segmentation? They want to build a product that goes across all markets, which means that I can't understand the value to a market segment. I just have to talk about my products and my features and everybody's going to love them.
Yeah, I think you raise a good point. And, if you look at the value-based pricing process, the 6 steps, this is probably the most neglected step is customer segmentation and understand your true value driver, the customer problems by segment, and the psychological profile of these segments. And so you're right. At the end of the day, because we don't know the value differential between segments, we just do plain vanilla stuff, and then we send it out there, and it's not very compelling, I would say, to your customer segments and users.
Yeah. So what are you working on now that's fascinating?
Well, a lot. I've been busier in these days than before, and more productive because I don't have to travel. So I'm leveraging technology to do a lot of my work. But I would say I spent quite a bit of time on the technology side, on the digital side, and helping the Thales group become more impactful in their digital transformation. So especially focusing on monetization of software and data. As you can imagine, for a product-centric company, it's quite a challenge and a change of mindset. So that's been keeping me very busy, especially working with our 3 digital factories and our innovation groups. So quite interesting. Another thing is subscription. Subscription is very trendy.
Yeah, very, very.
Yeah.
Can I ask, I want to go back to the other topic real fast,
Yeah.
just because I find it fascinating. Every hardware product company I've ever worked for, they tend to do cost plus pricing.
Mm-hmm.
And because of that, when they come out with software, they tend to think, oh, I should give that away because it helps me sell my hardware.
Mm-hmm.
How are you getting your company over that hurdle to stop thinking that way?
Well, I think it's this is where you put your warrior hat. Change your hat and you go in and you're talking to the digital folks. You're talking to the finance folks, and I think and I just wrote a piece lately on the blog saying that doing cost plus in a crisis is crazy, but also there's a lack of excellence in costing, and a lot of the time everything that's around the product is folded into the product cost, and it never appears anywhere. And a lot of the product teams are focusing on hardware, like you say. They're folding everything under the hardware cost, so the GUIs, the apps, the software, and then because of that, it's not appearing in the bids. And I'm like, well, this needs to change. We need to do costing, in the 21st century, where we need to know our true cost of software, a true cost of GUI and apps, and then we need to kind of debundle, rebundle, in the proposals, because it is, the value is migrating away from products, as you know, and if we have still continue doing everything in finance around the product, then we're not going to achieve our goal to show the value of everything else we do in the bundle, right?
Yeah, so I could see how I would be talking about costs of our software inside my company because I want to get my finance team, I want to get my sales team to start thinking that way. But when it comes to the bid, that should be about the value, right? How much,
Correct.
what do we think we can win this deal at? And how much value are we delivering to the client compared to the competition?
So if you look, Mark, at a maturity model in software monetization, a lot of the companies right now are talking a lot about the transition to the SaaS, moving away from perpetual to SaaS, right? Everybody's focusing on that. But a lot of the upfront work in stage 0 maturity, or 1, maybe 0 and 0.5, is around doing what you do today better, and sorting your internal challenges, and then make sure that when you do whatever you do with your software is costed right, and the value is estimated and assessed, right? The value you create, it's quantified. That's the basics. That's your basics. So when you sell a perpetual license, right, you know exactly what you're selling, the value of the functionalities of your modules, the value, of your upgrades, and then you design a perpetual type of model that is already value-based. Mm-hmm. And then you worry about your SaaS and the transition to the SaaS. So a lot of the things that I do today is, focusing on the product management community and telling them, software is important, but it cannot be a part of the product. It has to be separate. It's got to be treated separately. And the value of the software could be greater than the value of the product. As you can imagine, it's a cultural challenge.
I have to say, in most tech products today, the value of the software is the value of the product.
In a lot of them, yeah.
Yeah, because if you don't have the software, the product is pretty darned irrelevant in most cases.
You could say the same now in some very advanced industries on the data. The software is just, something to treat the data. So the value is in the data. So this is changing, Mark. It's a profound change in product management and technology management. And I think, we have a chief data officer, and I was on the phone with him yesterday to, and we're trying to push the value of data because we're data rich in Thales, and this is our gold mine for us. But it's not an easy way to find how much value we create with the data.
So it's back to that market segmentation. Who's going to value it, and
Correct.
what's the result that they're going to get?
Yeah.
So nice. Stephan, I have enjoyed this a ton, but we're almost out of time. I got to ask the final question though. What's one piece of pricing advice that you would give our listeners that you think could have a big impact on their business?
Well, my number one is focus more on value, or equally on value than in price. Price without value is great, but it's not going to give you the results that the outstanding results that you want. So even if you continue to do a little bit of cost plus for a while because you're transitioning, but at some point know the value that you deliver, and that will be a transformational exercise in your organization.
Boy, I couldn't agree with that anymore. That is just awesome. That is awesome. Stephan, thank you so much for your time today. If anybody wants to contact you, how can they do that?
Well, we can go to LinkedIn. I'm quite connected there, or stephanliozu.com, and find all kinds of comics and papers, and then my email in there.
And I'm sure we'll have your LinkedIn link in the show notes, so that'll be easy enough to find. All right, episode 74, all done. Let's see, what was my favorite part of today? Well, certainly talking about value I thought was really interesting, because that's all we talked about the entire time. But maybe why companies don't go to value. So what was your favorite part? Please let us know in the comments or wherever you downloaded and listened. While you're at it, would you please leave us a 5-star review? These are very, very helpful to us. Don't forget you can join us in our free community at community.championsofvalue.com. If you have any questions or comments about the podcast or about pricing in general, feel free to email me, mark@impactpricing.com. Now, go make an impact.